but maybe someone who can shed some more light on it is Kyle Shideler, Director of Treat Information at Secured Freedom. How are you, Kyle?
Hey, it's good to be on. Thank you very much.
All right, so the way I understand it, we've got the new prince that is going to take over for the king, but he, the way he was chosen is out of the norm for Saudi Arabia. Is that right, first of all?
Yes, to a certain extent.
Okay.
Typically, in the past, the Saudis have moved from brother to brother of the previous king, sort of so that all of the various branches of the family get a turn with the succession, and that this has been the case where the current King Salman is moving his son MBS, as he's called, Mohammed bin Salman, into a position to replace him when he passes, which, given the king's health and his age, could be any time in the near future. So it's a little bit of a change up there. Now, from the perspective of the U.S. and certainly the Trump administration, MBS in the Crown Prince position has been doing a lot of things that we consider very positive. Certain social reforms, cracking down on hardline clerics.
I mean, he stood up to Iran and some of the other bad players in the Middle East. So that all I look at him and I go, okay, good, right?
Absolutely.
But then some of the latest stuff, it looks like maybe he's
cleaning house,
doing away with people, right? Is that what's going on?
Well, what we have is MBS was put in charge of a corruption probe that was formed after the floods in Jeddah several years ago, which killed a number of Saudi citizens, and that occurred due to infrastructure failures, which were blamed on corruption. So they launched a sort of large-scale probe. Now, what MBS has said is that he wants to send the message that neither princes nor the rich and powerful are going to be exempted from the law in Saudi Arabia. That is certainly a change from the past. Now, the question is, amongst the people being picked up in the corruption probe are a number of high-ranking individuals, such as Prince Mitab bin Abdullah, who was previously the Minister of the National Guard, which is the sort of politicized Saudi security force that the Saudi royal family relies on for survival. And if MBS wants to secure his position, he would need to control that. So seeing him go certainly raises some questions. That said, there's also been people picked up in that corruption probe that are probably worth keeping an eye on. One of them is Salah Abdul Kamil, who's the chairman of a group called Dala al-Baraka Group, which is one of these organizations, investment organizations, that terror financier watchers back in 2000, 2002 were looking at after the 9/11 attacks. Similar individual, Mohammed Alamudi, also an investment banker. He's Ethiopian-born, but he's a Saudi citizen, and he was also a name that came up in the years after 9/11 when we were looking very heavily at sort of Saudi investors or businessmen who may have had ties to terrorism finance. Now, neither of those men have ever been charged with anything, but they're sort of those names that keep coming up. So it's possible that we are seeing the sort of crackdown and drive them out promise that the Saudis made to President Trump when he went to Riyadh for his summit.
Is that likely what they discuss? I mean, they really put this into full plan, I mean, within weeks after the meeting.
Yes, we saw immediately after that summit, the Saudis and the UAE moved against Qatar, who they accused of engaging in all manner of terrorism, finance, corruption, and subversion. And, of course, the Saudis began moving forward with the rest of this plan. Now, they're moving towards something they call Vision 2030, where they hope to really revamp the Saudi economy, take it away from this sort of graft and,
corruption?
Right, where they pay all the Saudi citizens from the governmental funds. It's very based
like a stipend.
Very based on oil, right? So they're trying to move away from these things, but it's a revolutionary change. Being led by a relatively young leader. There's going to be resistance to it, and so I think there's definitely reason to believe that MBS was trying to remove some of those obstacles with this corruption probe.
Interesting. Well, and then the oddest one, after all of this is rolling out, and there's questions about the state oil company, which we'll get to in a moment, but as all this is going on over the weekend, and I'm talking to Chris Cruz, our one producer here, and I'm like, this is all very odd. And then all of a sudden we get the news about the helicopter going down that had another prince on it.
Right.
I mean, wow, Kyle, that's really sketchy.
It certainly raises eyebrows. Obviously, helicopters do crash.
Sure.
Helicopter maintenance in deserts is a very tricky thing. But that all said, it was certainly odd timing. And the individual involved, who's deputy governor for that province along the border with Yemen, and as you know, the Saudis have been fighting a border war with the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. So it's a tricky area that is very important for the Saudis. Also, the individual who was killed in the helicopter crash, his father was formerly an intelligence chief for the Saudi kingdom, and he was removed, and the rumor was he was removed after the failure of Saudi efforts to oust Assad. So he was viewed as sort of a failure in this ongoing shadow war between the Saudis and the Iranians. He was also one of the people who was looked at as a possible crown prince to replace King Salman. So his ouster from power was very relevant to MBS's rise. So it's certainly very interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly very questionable. Worth taking a look at, but obviously we wouldn't want to jump to any conclusions necessarily.
So President Trump has had a couple of interesting tweets about this. As this is all going on, he tweeted 2 in a row. I have great confidence in King Solomon and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. They know exactly what they're doing. Confidence they know exactly what they're doing. Then he tweets, some of those that they're harshly treating have been, in quotations, milking their country for years. He also tweeted, would very much appreciate Saudi Arabia doing their IPO of Aramco. That's Aramco is the state-run oil company with the New York Stock Exchange. So that's recent. Who is Al-Walid Talal? Because in
Al-Walid bin Talal?
Yeah, that's a private. He tweeted in 2015, this is in December, Dopey Prince, and I pronounced it wrong, wants to control our U.S. politicians with daddy's money. Can't do it when I get elected, Trump 2016. Who is that guy?
So Prince Al-Walid bin Talal is the owner of an organization called Kingdom Holdings. It's a major Saudi investment group. They have large controlling shares of groups like Citigroup. He also has shares in Twitter, Apple, Motorola, Lyft, 21st Century Fox. He owns a number of hotels.
Is that the one they arrested, right?
And he was detained as part of this probe. Now, bin Talal is well known for people in sort of my space because of his role backing pro-Islamist, pro-Muslim Brotherhood academia, especially at Georgetown and Harvard. And so when bin Talal got into a bit of a Twitter push and shoving match with Donald Trump, he certainly didn't make himself any allies there. So it's an interesting move to see, especially with the Saudis know that there is a risk to the kingdom from the Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood. Right, this is part of their reaction with the whole Qatar blockade situation. It has to do with that outcome from the Arab Spring where there was an Islamist rise. The Saudis became very nervous and they began removing threats to the kingdom that were backing the sort of Islamist rise. We saw that, as I said, with the blockade of Qatar. We saw that with the recent arrest and detention of hardline clerics back in September. So Al-Walid bin Talal being sort of a funder of a lot of this ideology, it's kind of no surprise that he caught the eye of this corruption probe.
Like a Middle Eastern Game of Thrones.
That's really what's going on.
This is starting to sound like a John Grisham novel.
No, there's a lot at stake here. I mean, billions obviously in dollars and
Sure.
the control over the oil and
stability in the region.
And yeah, stability in the region. I know that, for example, like my family in Cairo, there the Saudis gave a lot of money to Cairo to kind of build the infrastructure because Egypt was fighting their own front on Islamist territory in the Sinai. So they're definitely trying to. It looks like they're trying to make things better, which is, I think, a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a challenge here. The Trump administration is taking a tact that previous administrations have sort of rejected. Most U.S. government policy in the past has said status quo is best. Let's not startle the horses. Let's keep everything calm and quiet. And Trump has really said, no, we think that the MBS plan for reform is really a positive. We want a strong U.S.-Saudi alliance going in as we move against the Iranians. And we've seen that with, for example, the Trump administration decision to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. So there's a number of places where the Trump administration and MBS's efforts are aligning.
So what's going on with Aramco, the state oil company there? They've got this IPO, but this goes into more of a whole future infrastructure funding changing. What's the plan again? 2030?
2030, yeah. 2030.
That's part of Aramco's IPO, though, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. The IPO is a necessary part of that.
Interesting. How much of this plays into what China has done in Russia with regards to oil exploration, and even the United States for that matter, because we're not as dependent on the Middle East as we used to be?
Well, that's part of the Saudis' problem. So especially with the rise of U.S. fracking, we've seen a suppression of oil prices, which have really hurt the Saudis in the pocketbook. So they have to do something to change things up. Now, one of the concerns that we do have, as you mentioned, China, is as Aramco comes to an IPO, is there a risk of large portions of it being bought up by the Chinese? And if that happens, is there a risk that the Chinese will pressure the Saudis to move oil trade from dollars to RMB, which is the Chinese currency? This obviously creates a risk because so much of the U.S. economy relies on this fact that the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency. So if we see that kind of pressure on the Saudis from the Chinese, that's a major concern.
Interesting stuff. Interesting. And all of this, of course, affects Americans in some profound ways. National security and then also the economy. It's tied to all of them. Kyle Shideler, thanks so much for joining us. And what I'll do is I'll tweet out a link to your information as well, okay?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.